podcast. I am your host, Chris Getty, and I have
Wordtris
a show lined up for you today. So let's go ahead and get started with the news. So a lot of great retro news this week, the week after April Fool's Day, so we can kind of get back to business. So the most interesting story this week is Analog Interactive announcing their 24-karat gold-plated analog NT. So the original analog NT is a custom NES.
Unlimited,
It has
difficulty
component, SCART, and an optional HDMI output. This is a really cool device. It was $500. People really had an issue with the price. When it was announced and released, I thought $500 was okay. It comes obviously with all the latest and greatest NES mods, like obviously the crystal clear RGB or HDMI output. Had a beautiful cast aluminum shell, which I thought was really nice. Came with a built-in 4-player or NES 4, whatever it's called. It had 4 controller ports for those games like Super Off-Road that supported 4 players. And it had a custom, basically the board was custom, it had some NES chips on it, so it was a nice mix of new and old, real NES hardware with all of those modern touches, a high-end NES, if you will. And I thought it was beautiful. I really wanted to buy one. I was planning on buying one with tax returns back in February. Decided not to, decided to buy some other retro gaming related items instead. And they are now sold out. They don't make them anymore. Having said that, last month I got an email from them that they have like another 20 or so in stock, and then this week I got an email from them indicating that they have this gold-plated NES. So this is an analog NT that's been gold-plated and sells for $5,000. There are 20 of them for sale. I don't know if there's 20 people. 20? I hope it's 20. I don't know if there are 20 people that would pay $5,000 for this high-end NES. We kind of saw this with like the Apple Watch, where they were trying to get into that ultra high-end market. I'm not sure. What I'm more interested in is once they sell all of these and make 100,000 plus, what are they going to do with that money? Their first product was the wooden MVS. Now we have the cast aluminum NES. And I'm very curious to see what they do next. It's a high-end company that makes some really awesome products. They always get great reviews, and I can't wait to see what they do next. So, also interesting is while people freaked out over the $500 NES and thought it was, a giant ripoff when you could blah blah blah, who cares? People don't seem as upset about a $5,000 NES, which I find amusing. So, let's go ahead. The next piece of news is the creator of the EverDrive has a working prototype of the Game Boy Advance EverDrive. I'm not super familiar with flashcards. I've never owned one, never used one, although I think there's probably going to be at least one in my future. Anyway, the EverDrive products have always been well reviewed. Austin has a bunch of these products and he absolutely loves them. And I think it's neat that there's going to be a Game Boy Advance EverDrive. I assume there must be other flashcards for the Game Boy Advance. I don't think this is something new that doesn't exist, but again, it's a little outside my comfort zone. I'm sure someone in the comments will correct me, and that's cool. But this is a guy that posts a lot of his pictures and progress and work on his Twitter page, which is, a really great use of Twitter. So, he's been posting some prototypes for the last few months, and now he has like a real NES prototype like in a little cartridge shell. So that'll be exciting when that comes out. Again, I probably won't buy something like this just because Game Boy Advance games are still pretty cheap. If you go to like a local shop, especially one that doesn't specialize in used games, but sells DVDs and CDs and stuff like that, usually there's a glass case full of GBA games and they're very cheap. I think I posted a picture last weekend. I got Sonic Advance on the Game Boy Advance for $3, $2.99, which is at least half of what it should go for. It really should be about a $10 game. So there are still deals to find out there as far as the Game Boy Advance is concerned. But thought it was cool nonetheless. The next piece of news is a fan game, online browser-based Zelda game. It was called the Zelda 30 Tribute. So Zelda turned 30 years old, I believe in February of 1986. Zelda came out on the Famicom Disk System. and that was 30 years ago, which is kind of amazing. I just talked about this game a couple of days ago. No, I just talked about this game yesterday in a video. I absolutely love The Legend of Zelda, and this fan made a browser-based game where he took the original Legend of Zelda and made it 3D using all of those original NES art assets. So it kind of had, I don't know, kind of like an isometric view, kind of top-down, and then all of the features of the world were like 3D polygons, and it looked pretty sweet. I didn't play this. I don't usually play browser-based games. I haven't tried out the NES emulator that kind of does those cool 3D tricks that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But of course, Nintendo shut this down. So a few days after this took off, it was all over the news, especially the mainstream media sites, and then of course Nintendo sent them a cease and desist letter, and you now can't play this online. Nintendo has always been very protective of their IP. I suspect when the developers put this out there for the world to see that they knew they were going to get a cease and desist letter, and they just did it anyway. You know, they put it out there, people talk about it, get excited about Zelda, or get excited about these kind of developments, and they know Nintendo's going to come shut it down. This reminded me of Princess Rescue. So Atari H they publish a lot of homebrew Atari 2600 releases, and these aren't usually very expensive, like $30 or so, maybe 35, which is a pretty awesome deal. So Albert over there does an awesome job with Atari Age, keeping that Atari 2600 community alive, and allowing these developers to put their games on physical cartridges, which I think is really cool. But Princess Rescue is an obvious, it's like a reimagining of the original Super Mario Brothers if it was done on the Atari, and it's a really lovely game. Supports 2 buttons when using a Genesis controller. Physics are obviously pretty bonkers, but it's kind of an authentic Mario experience, and definitely my favorite game on the Atari. So when this came out, I bought it immediately. I didn't get a box version, so I've got the cartridge and then a manual that's still sealed. And then this was on IGN. I think they did a YouTube video on it. And shortly thereafter, Albert then got a cease and desist letter from Nintendo saying, hey, this is Mario, you need to shut it down. So it disappeared from the store. A few days later, I think it was more or less confirmed that, yeah, it's not available anymore. So this is something that Nintendo has always done. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Sega, on the other hand, has always seemed a lot more friendly to the fans. There's a lot more fan remakes out there that Sega just sort of lets be, and they don't have any. If you have intellectual property, you're supposed to protect it. It's part of your duty. So Nintendo's on one end of this where they go to the extreme, and Sega's a little more lax. But I don't think Sega's in danger of losing the Sonic Hedgehog IP anytime soon with their more lax approach to the subject. So if you got to play the Zelda 30 tribute, congrats to you. It was on the internet for a few days, so I'm sure it's been copied and, is something that will always exist for everybody to enjoy. Of course, the next news story has to be Mike Kennedy. So Mike Kennedy, of course, unless you've been living under a rock, is the man behind the Coleco Chameleon. Now, I thought the Coleco Chameleon stories would just sort of die and we never have to talk about it again, but this gentleman seems to really like attention, so he started talking again, which was a huge mistake on his part. So anyway, this guy is Parrot Head on Atari Age. I've had limited interaction with Mike Kennedy. A few years back, we talked about Game Gavel, which is another Kennedy project. Right. And we talked about how it was not a very good eBay alternative. And he actually emailed us and said, oh, we're working on a bunch of updates, and I don't know, last time I looked at Game Gavel, all the pictures on the main screen didn't load, so it's still kind of a lackluster experience if you ask me, but whatever. He is Parrot Head on Atari Age, and he finally opened his mouth about the whole retro VGS and the Coleco Chameleon and kind of his take on it, which should be really interesting. Okay, let's, some behind-the-scenes news. Like I've said, I hope that, he was trying to do the right thing every step of the way, was put between a rock and a hard place and made the wrong decision. But what he proceeds to do is just shove everybody else under the bus. Instead of taking ownership that, yeah, I messed up and I would like to apologize to the community for these mistakes that I've made, he basically tries to say that he was innocent and everybody else is at fault. I believe he paid a lot of money for this whole project, at least $7,000. There's pictures of canceled checks. And he doesn't really have anything to show for that $7,000, which kind of tells me that, like Game Gavel, maybe he isn't the one that should be making these types of decisions with money. So, I believe his main engineer was somebody called Sean Lee something, it really doesn't matter, and he blames it all on him. So the big takeaways for me, obviously, are that he's not taking ownership of the issue, that yes, it's my fault, I made a lot of mistakes, I apologize for lying to the community, misleading the community, whatever. He doesn't do that at all. He never says the words "I'm sorry" in any of these posts, and that's pretty unfortunate. At some point, you just sort of have to take ownership of your mistakes and move forward. And he didn't take that opportunity, unfortunately. There are people that like this guy. There are people that have known this guy. He's been part of the retro gaming community for well over a decade. And he just, that reputation is over. So the first thing that he states, he admits that the New York Toy Fair prototype of the Coleco Chameleon was in fact a SNES Junior inside of a Jag shell, which we all kind of knew. We didn't need confirmation of that, it was all but assured. He paid $4,000 to an engineer to create this, and he basically states that he never opened it to investigate. If I paid $4,000 for a prototype, I would be opening it, and he didn't do that. I don't think he's telling the truth. If you paid $4,000 for a prototype, I don't know anybody in the entire world that wouldn't look at it, investigate, see what it is. So that doesn't pass the common sense test, I guess. So I think he's just flat out lying. Next, he states that he didn't know the next prototype, so this happened a couple of weeks later, right before the Kickstarter, where the next Coleco Chameleon prototype was a... Let me back up, we'll tie this all together. So the next one was a PCI capture card inside of a clear Jag shell. This was caught about 3 days later. The community finally figured out what the board inside this clear Jag shell was, and weirdly enough, the two most incriminating pictures were removed from the Retro VGS Facebook page, but the ones that weren't so obvious were left up there. So again, if you know you've been outed, that, okay, this isn't really a prototype of anything, it's just a bunch of crap taped together, why would you leave two photos up and take two down? Like, that doesn't make sense. You know it is fake. Take them all down. Now, obviously, that Retro VGS Facebook page is completely gone now, but here's what's weird. So, the second one, maybe he didn't know was fake, I don't know, maybe the fact it had no video output connectors, or maybe it did have video output connectors, it was a capture card, I guess they would be inputs, but maybe he thought they were outputs, but the fact that it doesn't have a cartridge slot, and maybe the fact that when you plug a PCI capture card into a TV, nothing happens, maybe that would be an obvious clue that, oh, this isn't what I think it is. Again, you're just lying. If you can't plug that into a TV, it just doesn't work. Like, you're just lying again. So, the SNES Junior prototype, the clear Jag shell was spray painted black so nobody can see inside it, where the second prototype was clear. So there's another obvious way that, okay, he knew he didn't want anyone to see inside of the first prototype Coleco Chameleon because it's painted black. He doesn't want anybody to see inside it because it would probably be obvious that it was a Super Nintendo. So everything he's saying is pretty much, he's trying to cover his ass, but it's obvious he's just lying. So I don't understand why he doesn't just take ownership of the issue and apologize. I don't understand why he keeps trying to say all of these things he didn't know. I really am a good guy. I was just I'm out all of this money. Please feel sorry for me. I don't get it. Just take ownership. You messed up. You didn't have a product and you wasted a lot of money and you wasted a lot of people's time and excitement. Just apologize. Icing on the cake of this whole thing is that his posts on Atari Age, after he sits here and blames everybody but himself, his way of apologizing air quotes if you're listening to the MP3. His way of apologizing is saying, here's a discount code to my digital magazine. Yeah, screw yourself. Alright, next we're going to move to the meat of this issue. So I'm going to talk about tag videos. So back in 2010, 2011, when YouTube was a lot smaller and there were a lot less people talking about retro video games, the community was a lot smaller and a lot more close-knit. And YouTube had this feature where you could respond to people's videos with your own video. I believe you could respond to comments with a video. And it was kind of neat. And it kind of made YouTube feel more like a social network rather than just a bunch of videos on the internet. So I have an old video. One of my favorite people on the internet is Maximum RD, Rob. I think his last name's DeVoe. Again, I should really write more of this down before I start talking. But anyway, Rob, awesome community member of YouTube. And he made a video back in 2010 saying, what game console do you love that everyone else hates? And I responded to this with the 32X. So I responded to his question with a video talking about the 32X and why I enjoy it so much and why other people shouldn't hate it. It was a really neat feature of YouTube. A couple years ago they got rid of the response video functions of YouTube, saying nobody used them. Which is probably right. Unfortunately, I don't usually partake in these types of community things, which I probably should, but I guess that's beyond the point. So anyway, people still do these types of videos. It's just not an official way to do it on YouTube. You just sort of have to talk about it and proceed, and there is no, you can't go to somebody's video and then see all the video responses they received. But somebody tagged me in a video. I'll have to put a link to this in the description or in the show notes. Someone called Big Will, who comments on my videos all the time and really, encouraging guy. And he has his own channel, just a couple hundred subs or 150 subs or something like that. He's got a great speaking voice, and he does videos about games that he really enjoys, and he also does videos about games that he hasn't played and what his first impressions are. I really like the first impression style videos. I like somebody that's newer to retro gaming, or maybe just someone that's always retro gamed, but hasn't played like a classic title. Because, while it's fun to know what people that have played a Castlevania game their entire life, what their impression is, I'd like to know what somebody who has never played a Castlevania game before, how does it feel to play that game for the first time? Because as I go through this YouTube journey, I reviewed all of the games from my childhood a long time ago. So most of the games that I review are something fresh, something that I've only owned for a year, something that I've only owned for a couple of months. And looking at that from a fresh lens, not a nostalgia lens. Not that there's a problem with either. So, getting way off topic, he tagged me in a video asking, the question is, what are 5 games that you're most nostalgic for? So this took me a while to kind of come up with this list, so I'm going to give you 5 nostalgic games, 5 games that I have the most nostalgic feelings for, and hopefully have somewhat of a coherent story about each of these. So the first 2 for me go hand in hand, because this takes me back to the 80s, when I was just 5 or 6 years old. The first 2 being Super Mario Brothers and The Legend of Zelda. So this is when I was first exposed to video games. I played or saw the original NES before the Atari 2600. The Atari 2600 is the very first game console I ever owned. I think it was Christmas of 91 or 92, maybe 1990. It's such a blur, it's a long time ago. We got an Atari 2600 with 30 games. They couldn't have paid much for it. It's kind of like today, you buy an Atari with a box of games. But we didn't really know how to use it, so now that I have an Atari 2600, I realize that to start a lot of games, you have to hit reset, which makes no sense, or, maybe the buttons on our 2600 didn't work, so a lot of the games, me and my sister just couldn't figure out how to play. So eventually it got sold and we got an NES, and then my real journey started. But before owning those, Super Mario Brothers is something that I played at a family member's house way back. I have a picture somewhere. I'd like to find it. It's very vivid. It's from Christmas of 1989. So I am 6 years old, sitting on a chair with like a country background. I don't know if that particular style of couch is popular in other parts of the world, but my American listeners can probably picture that very vividly. There'd be like a windmill or a deer, or just like really awful patterns, but that's what was popular in the 80s, holding an NES controller smiling. So I'd like to find that picture just because it's kind of, it's a picture of when this all started for me or when I really fell in love with video games. So I remember vividly playing the original Super Mario Brothers at family gatherings on Christmas. And what I really remember is my mother, when you have to take Mario over a big jump, always moving the controller, like, jump, which is something that I always find funny because I sit there calmly and don't wiggle the controller around at all. But I'm sure many of you have a similar experience where people would try to move or wave the controller in air as if that's somehow going to help. Around that same time is my babysitter's house. So after school, I would my mother worked second shift. So after school, I would be at a babysitter's house till 11 o'clock or whatever. And I always remember her and her son playing The Legend of Zelda on the NES. Now, I don't think they ever let me play, but I would sit there and watch them for hours play The Legend of Zelda, beating the first quest, beating the second quest, for years. Like, I just remember it very vividly. So when I finally got my own NES in The Legend of Zelda, like, I remembered where to bomb. I remember what bushes to burn with the candle. Like, all of this just stuck in my mind. And maybe that's part of the reason I love The Legend of Zelda so much. Like, I remember watching it and understanding everything in the game. And then when I finally got it, all that stuck with me. And it's just always been there. So that's number 2. The next one is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is not my favorite Sonic game. Obviously, I love it. One of my favorite games, but not my favorite Sonic game. But this I remember at a cousin's house. Again, so after the babysitter, then my aunt watched me after school. And we always played Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and we always played 2-player mode. So you play through the 3 levels, Green Hill, Casino Night, and Mystic Cave, plus the bonus stage, and then, the winner was the winner. We would do that every day after school, and it was just absolutely awesome. So again, before I ever owned a Genesis, I loved going over there and playing 2-player Sonic the Hedgehog and trying to figure out, the right ratio of speed and rings to collect so that, you win after all the rounds are over, especially the half pipe and, trying to jump in front of the other person so that you get all of the rings, and yeah, just awesome. I'll never forget that. Next is going to be Super Mario Kart. Now, I did not own a Super Nintendo as a kid at all, but I always remember going to a friend's house who had a Super Nintendo. So we had an NES and then later a Genesis. But a friend had a Super Nintendo, and I loved racing games. We talked about that when I talked about RC Pro-Am. But Super Mario Kart really blew my mind, and I only wanted to go to his house to play Super Mario Kart, which I'm sure was really annoying to him. He wanted, let's go play Legos, let's go outside. And I'm like, can we play Super Mario Kart, please? So I own that now. It's actually in my Super Nintendo. We'll review that someday. But again, it's one of those games that, it always takes me back to living in the first time I lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and, being in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and all I wanted to do was go to my friend's house and play Super Mario Kart. And then last but not least is the Jungle Book on the Super Nintendo. So this, again, didn't own this until probably 1997 or 1998, but the Jungle Book on the Sega Genesis always brings me back to my grandma's house. So again, my grandma she had, what am I trying to say? Her youngest son, my uncle, was a big video gamer, and they were fairly well off, so they always had the latest systems. So they had a Genesis when it was new, they had a PlayStation when it was new, and then obviously I became an adult, and that's less important. But I remember vividly just playing the Jungle Book and hearing Bare Necessities played on the Genesis, and the title screen and the way the title kind of, animates or rotates on that front screen, and playing through that. And at this point, I was better at video games than any of my cousins or my uncle or anything like that, so I could get farther than anybody else. But whenever I play that game, I think I just beat it a year and a half ago when I reviewed it for this channel. beat it for the first time, but those first couple of levels always just like bring me again back to being a kid, being at my grandma's house and having, 5, 6, 7 grandchildren all huddled around the Genesis, passing the controller, seeing who could get the farthest. So those are my 5 most nostalgic games: Super Mario Brothers, The Legend of Zelda, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Super Mario Kart, and The Jungle Book. So I hope you enjoyed those stories. Now we're getting to the end of the episode here, which means of course we're going to talk about cheap games. So we're going to talk about 2 games that I paid less than $5 for, one that goes for more than $5 now, and the second which is still under $5. The intent of this, of course, is to kind of celebrate cheap games and to kind of point out some of those good games that are still really cheap. You don't need to always spend $40 or $50 to have a good retro game. So we'll start with the... Let's see if I can get that to focus. $2.99, again, a Goodwill find. This, of course, is the Genesis 6-pack. There's 6 games on here: Sonic the Hedgehog, Golden Axe, Revenge of Shinobi, Columns, Super Hang-On, and Streets of Rage. I've reviewed 3 games on here: Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, Golden Axe, and Streets of Rage. And I don't like Columns, I don't like The Revenge of Shinobi, and I don't like Super Hang-On, so I don't think I'll be touching those anytime soon. Other people do love those games, and this goes for about $10 now at the most. You could probably still find it for $5 if you look hard enough, but you should, it's totally worth $10. Streets of Rage, I believe this is the cheapest way to own the original Streets of Rage, which is an awesome beat-em-up that I still find holds up incredibly well. Even though Streets of Rage 2 is better, Streets of Rage is still a ton of fun and totally worth playing. Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, is a dirt cheap game. There's millions of them out there. And then, so for me, those are the 2 takeaways on here. I don't like Golden Axe. I've already talked about that. I don't feel it's aged well, especially when you compare it to Streets of Rage. Columns is just a puzzle game I can never get into. Super Hang-On has really weird controls that I don't like. And Revenge of Shinobi, the classic Shinobi games just don't grab me. I'd like to really get through that and understand what people dig so much about the Shinobi series, but we shall see. And then the second game is... there's no way to do this. This was, let's see, $1.99. This is Miss Pac-Man on the Atari 2600. The Atari 2600 is a weird system to get into today. As I kind of alluded to, back when I was a kid, I couldn't figure out how to use it because it has 4 or 6 switches on the front, and as a kid I didn't know what they all did, so you can select game modes, and the reset usually starts a game if you die, and stuff like that. And just a lot of the games employ concepts that just don't really work anymore. I don't know how else to phrase it, but there are still a lot of great 2600 games that, even if you didn't play video games in the late 70s, early 80s, that still hold up really well and are just a lot of fun. We talked about Princess Rescue earlier being one of those. Miss Pac-Man is a great version of Pac-Man. So the first Pac-Man was garbage. Let's see here. So, we know the history, right? Pac-Man, E.T., and some others, caused the North American video game crash. Blah, blah, blah. But Miss Pac-Man's actually really awesome. Black background, controllers are great, the sound is great, everything about this is just a really good version of Pac-Man. So if you're looking for a fun, cheap game to play on your 2600, this is just necessary. It's a great game, up there with like Yars' Revenge or that Activision game I always forget the name of. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of call that out. I think it's pretty well known that this is a solid version of Pac-Man, but I didn't get a 2600 again until real recently, so for me it's been kind of a challenge and a weird journey to try and find some of these games that still hold up today, because I feel some of them, they just don't work anymore. It's really easy to buy a 2600 game and not really know what on earth is going on. So those are my 2 cheap picks. And that's all the time we have for this episode. So, if you are listening to this and you would like to watch it, visit youtube.com/ImplantGames. If you're watching this and would rather have this as a normal MP3 podcast, there's the RSS feed and the iTunes link in the description below. Until next time, guys, have a great week. easy because you can mow through enemies a lot faster. Whether you feel that's, ethical or not, I guess that's a topic for another day. But overall, like, totally for $4, it's a no-brainer. But it's one of those Master System games that you didn't have to play, back in the 80s as a kid to appreciate. You don't have to have nostalgia to appreciate it. Just a solid, fun shooter game. Totally recommended. Unfortunately, these days it seems to go for about $25 for a loose copy and $50 or so for a complete copy. Yeah, this one's pretty sweet. We got the manual and there's a poster in here as well. Let's see that. So a good score back in the day. Unfortunately, it's not $5 anymore, which leads us to the next game, which is Twin. I went the wrong way. So there we go, $3.99. This I picked up like 2 years ago. $3.99 for a complete in-box Nintendo game. That's pretty gnarly. So a couple of years ago, mostly where I find good deals now is a local pawn shop. It's kind of like I've talked about it before, Pawn America. But that's about the only place I can find deals anymore, because they deal in so many different things, from tools to old computers to movies to iPhones to jewelry. Sometimes they don't price games the best, and if you can find a store like that that has games but that's not their area of expertise, that's your best shot at getting a good deal, because if you go to a dedicated game store, they know what everything costs, and you're probably not going to, find a good deal or an insane deal. But Twin Cobra, $3.99. This goes for about $5 loose today, and in my opinion, it's definitely one of my favorite NES shmups, if not my favorite. It's a vertically scrolling shooter. Really reminds me of Raiden, or maybe something like Sonic Wings or Aero Fighters, where it's very simple, and that's what I really enjoy about it. There's not like a complex upgrading scheme or anything like that. Basically, your two main weapons are like a spread shot or a laser shot. And it's sort of not true, but it's the simplest way to explain it. There are 4 different weapons, and then they can all be upgraded a couple of times, and you have bombs, and that's pretty much it. And I really enjoy games, shmups in particular, where you defeat a wave of enemies, it drops power up, and you collect it and move on with your day. That really appeals to me. The levels are really simple. Again, really reminds me of Raiden. I don't know the history of Twin Cobra, or why it feels or looks so similar to Raiden, but whatever. If you're looking for a cheap NES shooter that is of really great gameplay-wise, really great quality, you really can't get much better than Twin Cobra. The things that kind of suck about it, the graphics are a bit choppy, and the soundtrack is a bit iffy. I guess that would be putting it mildly. I talked about this a few times over the past few years, so if you want to hear like my full coherent thoughts on that, definitely get that and check it out. So that is kind of all I have time for today. Again, there was not too much news, the 360 and the PlayStation 4 Neo being the big two. I'm really curious about what Sega allows with the Mega Drive Classics hub, if that will come to America, because right now it's European only. And then I don't really have too much else to say. I did pick up a PC Engine, specifically the Super Graphics. I didn't buy it, I sort of bought it. I traded in the Virtual Boy and some Pokemon games and a few other things, threw in some cash to get that. I don't want to pay $200 for anything, so I do a lot of trading. The Virtual Boy is something I've owned, I've always wanted, however, I just never played it. It's kind of a pain to use, because you either have to sit there and look into the visor, or you have to lay down with it on your face, and I was just never in the mood, I guess, to play that. I had the Mario Tennis, I had Wario World, or whatever the game was called, the platformer, which was kind of neat, but I just never wanted to play it. I don't have any nostalgia for it, or, I don't have any reason to hang on to it. Leaving the collection doesn't, make me feel empty or anything. So that was the big thing that I got rid of. So I got the Super Graphics because it was available and because it looks kind of badass. I don't know if I'll ever own any Super Graphics games, but it's a neat system I think will hold its value. Now these don't output RGB natively, which is kind of annoying. like the pinouts, the AV out, they're just not wired for RGB. And I don't know what encoder chip is in these things, but basically you can get RGB out of it. It has a red, green, and a blue, and a sync, of course, line, and you can build circuits to get that out of it. So I did buy a device that hooks into the back. That's the other thing that's really cool about the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx is like there's a connector on the back of these that has like 45 pins or something, and like everything is there. So I bought something from DB Electronics, the Turbo Booster something or other that just plugs into the back, and has a Sony, the main Sony chip that's in a lot of classic systems, that's in the Genesis, the Master System, the CI, that can take those video signals and then outputs composite as video along with RGB. Unfortunately, and the coolest thing about this thing from DB Electronics is it uses a Genesis 2, the smaller video cable. So of course I have a Genesis RGB cable. Unfortunately, when I hooked it into the FrameMeister, it did not display a picture. More disappointing then is I took the S-Video out on this device, and again, the FrameMeister just wouldn't see it. It wouldn't see the S-Video at all, and then on the RGB, the picture was almost black. So went down to the basement, got one of my CRTs that has S-Video, brought that into the dining room here, and the S-Video looked great. So I suspect this device works for like a real RGB monitor, because it works with my S-Video monitor, but for some reason it doesn't play nice with the FrameMeister. So from here, I'm not really sure how I'm going to get video into the FrameMeister in pristine quality from the PC Engine. I'm hoping the HD Retrovision cables come out for the Genesis. That'll take a RGB signal and convert it to component video, and then hopefully the FrameMeister can see that beautiful 240p component. I might track down a SCART to HDMI adapter. I really don't want to do that. I wonder if the FrameMeister can take 240p over HDMI. That would be an interesting question. I don't actually know the answer to that. We'll see. So one of those two, I suspect, is going to be what I have to do. And why I think it will work is because the Dreamcast VGA output has never worked on any flat screen TV I've ever owned in my life. However, on a VGA to HDMI converter, it sees the VGA signal and converts it without an issue. So I don't know if this device puts out an RGB signal that's slightly off spec, that's something like the HD Retrovision cables could correct and see. I don't know, but that's what I'm hoping for so that I can finally play some PC Engine games. I've owned a TurboGrafx in the past. It's not a system I'm hugely a fan of, and that's not because there's something wrong with the system. Most of the good games seem to cost a lot, and I don't really have the time or energy to kind of sift through, dozens of games trying to find those cheap ones that are really awesome. It'll take me a while. I did pick up 3 PC Engine games. These were cheap. I don't remember what this one is called. This was $5. It's 1987. Looks like a platformer. You buy some things and upgrade your shots. Just typical side scroll from the 80s, and then a pair of racing games. So this is F1 Circus 91, and $5. This is the one I've spent the most time on. It'll probably be the first PC Engine game I review. And then Motor Rotor 2, another top-down racer, which I hope to put some time into. So that'll probably be 4 or 5 months when I get all of that sorted, where I can play the games how I want to play them, which is upscale beautifully. But we'll get there. Alright, so I guess that added some time to the show. So I have a PC Engine, I have 3 games. It's going to be a while before I really have enough games and experience to really talk about it and not sound like an idiot. But we'll get there when we get there. So, again, I'm Chris Kenthy. If you want to listen to the show like an MP3, the RSS feed, let's see, what am I trying to say? If you want to listen to the show like a normal MP3, I will have the RSS feed in the description below. If you're listening to the show and you want to see me and see all the things that I'm talking about, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ImplantGames, and you can see my lovely face. And until next time, guys, have a great week. Hello and welcome to episode 85 of the Implant Games podcast. I am your host, Chris Ganthe, and I have a great show lined up for you today. So let's go ahead and get started with, let's back up a little bit. So I've been doing this show on Sunday mornings since January. I only missed one due to some issues, but for the rest of the summer, I'm going to move this to Tuesday evening. And the reason why is because the weather's getting better here in Wisconsin, and I live out in the country now, and taking up that big 4-hour block of time during my Sunday kind of eats up a lot of the weekend. So I'm going to shuffle things around a bit. So lately I have been doing videos on Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday. I'm going to change that to Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Shuffle things around, and I think that will help video production go a bit more smooth here during the summer months. So hope you stick around for Tuesday. Hope that doesn't mess with your week. But now let's go ahead and get started with the news. So yesterday, actually, Mighty Number 9 got a release date, which will be June 21st, coming up here in about a month and a half. So we talked about Mighty Number 9 getting delayed quite a bit. Most recently, getting delayed again at the beginning of February. The game was originally supposed to come out in April of 2015, so that's over a year ago this game was supposed to come out. And we all know, I think it was 3 years ago, it raised $4 million on Kickstarter. So as the release dates have come and gone, fans, of course, always, people complain because that's what people do. But I kind of feel like in this case, it's rightfully so. The deal you make with somebody on Kickstarter is you accept their money for a product that isn't finished or doesn't exist yet. So with Mighty Number 9, obviously the project was started. He, Inafune, guy that made the Mega Man games, obviously said, this is what we want your money for, this is our time frame, this is how we're going to release it. And when you kind of take $4 million from people and then kind of don't deliver on what you say you're going to do, there is some room to be upset and to be angry. Me personally, I've never supported, not that I won't ever, I don't have a problem with Kickstarter, I think it's a great model. But, if you are going to take people's money, I think you kind of need to set realistic expectations. This is a guy that's made a lot of Mega Man games over the last 3 decades, should know how to run a project, should know how to run a team, and the people that did pay all of that money to have access to that game, to fund that game, that sequel that they've been looking for so long, I think deserve to be upset. So really now, June comes, it will be really interesting. Is Mighty Number 9 going to live up to the hype? Obviously Mega Man has a ton of fans. I'm still buying Mega Man games. I just bought Mega Man Extreme on the Game Boy Color, along with Mega Man and Bass on the Game Boy Advance. So I've been playing those for the last few weeks. Anytime I see a Mega Man game for a reasonable price, I always grab it because it's such a wonderful series. So we'll see if Mighty Number 9 can capture that magic and kind of erase, all of that kind of ill will they've created for being kind of quiet and being kind of pokey and kind of offering lame excuses like issues with network code on a game that doesn't really need network code. But this actually just happened yesterday. It's going to have a release date. The game is finished June 21st, 2016. So I hope it's amazing. I'll be real disappointed if it just doesn't live up to the hype. Obviously, Inafune is a brilliant game designer. The level structure, the gameplay mechanics in the regular Nintendo and Super Nintendo Mega Man games are just phenomenal, just light years above anything else. And I'll be curious if they're able to kind of capture that magic that made those games so special. But June 21st, delayed, and here we are, 13 months after it was originally supposed to come out. So that's very exciting. The other piece of exciting official news is the Nintendo NX, the next Nintendo system, is going to be coming out in March of 2017, so less than a year away. So clearly Nintendo has been working on this for years, like you would expect all of the big three to be doing, but they're going to be the first with a release date, which kind of Makes you wonder if the next system from Microsoft might, be coming out a little sooner than they expect. But the weirdest thing about a March date is that it kind of misses the holiday season. So specifically in video games, that September, October, November range has traditionally, kind of been the sweet spot. You get that system out there, you get the bugs worked out, you get systems into, stores, into the channels, so that when Christmas comes around, your product is available there when everybody is, in America at least, is spending a ton of money. So what I did is I went through and looked at what other systems kind of launched in that spring to summer window. What consoles and systems came out before, that fall to holiday launch. So the first one is the Game Gear, which came out these are all US dates, I believe, I hope. The first one is the Game Gear, which came out in April of 1981. Obviously, the Game Gear didn't make much of a dent into Game Boy sales, but the Game Gear certainly has its fans. It's a great... I don't know why the camera's doing that. I have a storm rolling in here, so the light keeps changing, and this camera kind of sucks as it is, so for those of you watching, I apologize. So the Game Gear came reasonably successful, lasted through 1996, but wasn't a huge success. The next system, also Sega, would have been the Sega Saturn with their surprise launch in May of 1995. Not only was the surprise a bad idea, because not every retailer had access to the Sega Saturn, it also happened in May. Again, missing that holiday window completely. We all know what happens then. The PlayStation in America comes out in September, owns the holiday, and yeah, the rest is history, isn't it? The next system, going out a little farther, is going to be the Game Boy Advance in June of 2001. Game Boy Advance went on to have a very healthy, successful lifespan. Again, I just mentioned I'm still playing it, Mega Man and Bass. A lot of my favorite 16-bit games happen to be on the Game Boy Advance. To me, the Game Boy Advance is really awesome because it kind of extended the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. A lot of games on both of those systems either got ported, remade, or sequels that lived on through the Game Boy Advance, like Metal Slug Advance. I don't know why I wanted to mention that. I just really enjoyed that game. But I did a whole video on it, and you should check it out. So again, the June date didn't hurt the sales of that system at all. The Nintendo 3DS launched in March of 2011. That did struggle for quite a while before, I'm sure, a Pokemon game came out, and then everything went back to normal. But again, launched at a weird time. March, maybe tax returns in the US, people have more income. Most people, I think, buy refrigerators or cars or pay off credit card debt. I'm not sure if a lot of that kind of boost, if it is even a lot, I guess, is really used for spending money on kids. Weird story, though. That is how I got my Sega Genesis. I think it was the spring of 1996. With tax returns, we got to go to the store and pick out a system. And the Super Nintendo, I believe at the time, was $99.99, and the Genesis was $89.99. And because it was $10 cheaper, and we could get a Genesis and a game, we went with the Sega Genesis. And the rest is history. How crazy is that? And then February 2012, the PlayStation Vita. Again, I don't know if all of these dates are Japanese, American, European. I guess it doesn't really matter. The point is that plenty of systems have launched in the spring. Things like the 3DS and Vita kind of didn't do so hot. Other things did just fine, like the Game Boy Advance, and to a lesser extent, the Game Gear. There has been speculation on some launch titles for the NX, Zelda games getting delayed, this getting pushed back, simultaneous releases. Kind of had a hard time sifting through what was speculation and what was news. Not that interested on trying to report something as news if it isn't. I'm not that interested in providing wrong information or speculating on wrong information. So I'm usually pretty reserved when it comes to reporting on things. So like the Turbo HD April Fool's prank, I did not talk about until it was confirmed it wasn't real for that very reason. So that's what it is going to come down to, that's what everything that we've talked about since January comes down to, whether it's the next Nintendo, whether it's the PlayStation Neo, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's the consoles that don't exist like the Chameleon or the Dreamcast 2. The hardware is interesting and okay, but what really matters is the games. And Nintendo's next console is going to be dependent on the games. We look at some things that were really popular and exciting when they came out, like the Wii had the Wii Sports, which was a huge hit, and that's why people bought the Wii. You look at the Nintendo 64 launch lineup of 2 or 3 games, but one of them was Super Mario 64, which was an epic game, and that sells systems. We look at the GameCube with Luigi's Mansion, not as exciting, and that launch wasn't as successful as a lot of other systems because it was missing that killer app. You know, the Xbox had Halo, that's what, you know, made that entire business for Microsoft. So Nintendo really needs a Zelda game, a Mario game, and maybe a couple other first-party games that, you know, people will attach onto that. Oh, I've played, you know, Mario NX, I might as well get, you know, the Kirby game as well. That's what it's all going to come down to. I have a feeling Nintendo's not going to screw up the next Nintendo system. They know how to make a system, they know how to launch a system. Obviously their Game Boy and I guess now you would call it the DS series of handhelds, they've had wild success in that field and nobody else could. Like Nintendo has that secret sauce. So I fully expect them, despite a weird launch date, to do the right thing, to have the right software, and to really knock it out of the park. But I guess we'll find out in a year. Alright, the next thing I'm going to talk about is going to be a comment from Simbin, who says 4K gaming on a $400
I'd like to see if I can beat non-spouse
today. Even a $1,500 gaming PC can struggle with some of the most demanding games at 4K. So this was in response to my disappointment that the PlayStation Neo, the PlayStation 4.5, that upgraded PlayStation system where all games starting in October have to support the new hardware in this system, won't be running in 4K. Obviously 4K would require, let's just make it simple, it's not this simple, but 4K is essentially, you know, 4 times HD, twice the height, twice the width, that gives you 4 times the graphic fidelity. So having the power to, you know, do that extra math, the RAM, you know, for all those extra textures, the frame buffers, all of that from start to finish, is not going to be easy. And like Simbin says, if they can't do it on a $1,500 gaming PC, how can you do it on a console? That's probably true. I don't disagree with it at all. I think game consoles kind of have a history of being significantly cheaper than PCs. So if you look at like the Genesis and Super Nintendo days, it would take a significantly, you know, something that could be done on the Genesis or Super Nintendo, to do that like on a DOS gaming rig back in the mid-90s would have costed would have cost exponentially more money to do. So that's kind of always been the thing. You can cut out the Windows or the Mac OS, you can cut off a lot of things and have all those cycles, you know, meant for filling out 4K worth of pixels. But perhaps that's too much of a reach for that type of fidelity. I'm not sure. Without having 4K support, the thought of all games running in 1080p at 60 frames per second just isn't worth the $400 or $500 it's going to cost. If I'm sitting, you know, X amount of feet away from my TV, so in this case like 12 feet or 10 feet or something, like, I'm not going to see the difference between 900p and 1080p. It just isn't worth it. So it'll be real interesting. Next month will be, or this month I guess, I don't know, E3 has always been in May, so I guess I just take it for granted that that's when it's going to happen. So E3 is going to happen, and then, you know, the big three are going to have their own events around the same time, but it should be really exciting to see what Microsoft, PlayStation, and Nintendo do with their next systems. It sounds like they're all going in different directions, and that's really exciting because that hasn't happened in a long time. You know, the Xbox and the PlayStation have kind of been the same for the last couple of generations, so it'll be interesting to see, you know, who wins, who's right, and more importantly, what games, you know, where is that going to head, because that's what it all comes down to. Last week I also talked about a service on the Xbox. What did we bring this up? The Sega thing on Steam. I've already forgotten. I don't have last week's notes ahead of me. But Sega announced, damn it, I'm gonna have to look it up, Mega Drive Classics Hub, where they said it would be supporting the Steam Workshop for mods, and they didn't say what that meant. I was kind of afraid that that meant you could share the different changes you make to your game room, but it seems like they're allowing full sharing of mods of old Sonic games, and you can do this officially through Steam without Sega like yelling at you and screaming copyright infringement, you're sharing, but like they let you do it, which is pretty awesome. But the old Xbox thing that was kind of similar was called Game Room. And this comes from PinMike8666. The Xbox app was Game Room. It's cool. They got some unknown Konami games like Dentana, Twinbee, and Battlelinus. I'm saying that wrong. Battlelinus? I'm not sure. But anyway, people did use the service, and it was kind of a similar thing minus the sharing, but that's what it was called. It was called the Game Room. So thank you very much for the correction. The next news story I want to talk about, again, was Classic Game Room. So this whole topic is really what launched this podcast back into existence and in the current format that it is in. So at the beginning or the end of last year, Classic Game Room was going to shut down. His fans said, no, we want to support you, look into this Patreon thing. It seems Mark over there looked into Patreon, set out a budget, a plan. He needed $10,000 a month to keep the show going. He got there, and the show exists now. So I don't support Classic Game Room, so I'm not sure what kind of perks or what other things he's doing, but he got what he needed. The fans spoke, and the show is going. He did just do an update a few days ago, basically saying that the show's going to run through 2016, but after that, Classic Game Room is back in limbo. What has slowly happened over the last month is he went from about $11,000 a month to around $9,300 a month. So his Patreon has kind of lost almost 10% or a little over 10% of its value in a very short amount of time. So it seems he's going to keep the show going, but he can't, what am I trying to say? It might die again. What I find really weird about the whole Classic Game Room, this took off. Classic Game Room is a great show, and I still watch it. Like, what did he just do? He just did a pole position on the Atari 400 or the Atari XE. And whenever I see him review an old 80s game like that, I always watch it, because I know I'm going to be entertained for 5 minutes, and I know I'm going to see a game that I know nothing about. I've never played on an Atari computer in my entire life, and I love when people make quick, entertaining, somewhat informative videos like that. Like, that's what appeals to me. So I watch that. He does a ton of other videos that don't really seem to be targeting me at all. Some 2-minute show called Who Defeats, God only knows what that is. His drawing shows I've watched a few times, but, I'm just not that interested. That's not... there's a market for that. There's a market for people drawing and doing art and, playing guitar and things like that. It's just not... that's not what appeals to me, and I don't watch it. But where was I going with this? So Mark was one of the very first people to really take YouTube by storm in the classic retro gaming kind of circle. And the reason why is because he was one of the first. If you watch some of his videos from 2008, they're not that great. They're not that well produced. But they are entertaining, and you can kind of see how the show would evolve to where it is today. And then YouTube, sometime in 2012 and 2013, changed the way they feed us videos. So before, it was all about that cover art, and the cover art would get you clicks, and the more clicks you got, the more YouTube would say, oh, people are clicking on this, let's show more people, and that's kind of how it worked. So Mark was one of the very first. Being first is always really important. He was one of the first doing this way back in 2008, and because he had this massive library of old games, he kind of owned that market. People would see an old picture of a 2600 and they would click on the video, because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to watch a video of somebody playing the Atari 2600? And then in 2012, 2013, YouTube basically flipped a switch and basically said, we no longer care about clicks, now we care about retention. YouTube's goal is to keep you on YouTube for as many minutes and hours as possible. So when I make my videos, I'm always paying attention to retention. Like this show will get a fraction of the views that my other shows will get. On the flip side, 2/3 of you are listening to this like a traditional podcast, through an RSS feeder, through your iPod or your iPhone, or I'm gonna have to get this on Google Play and not miss out on that boat. But I know what type of videos are going to get the most watches, and I know how to make them and keep them flowing in a way to keep people watching them. Hopefully if they hit the end of the video, YouTube streams up the next one. And it's really easy to see when a video does exactly what YouTube wants, and all of a sudden I have a huge spike in views, and it's pretty easy to see when I fail and people don't make it through the video, don't watch the next video, and that retention is gone. They've watched one video, didn't like it, and moved on. So I stopped last month. I'm sure some of you noticed I stopped doing reviews. And this is all kind of related. So Mark went from about 20 million views a month, which is a huge, insane amount of money. I mean, we're talking probably $40,000 a month, at least $40,000 a month, possibly even in the $50,000 range. You're thinking all of those videos, $5 CPM, all of those videos are getting ads because that's what YouTube is telling people to watch, like an insane amount of money. And when they flip the switch to where retention matters instead of clicks, he dropped from about 20 million to 2 million views a month in just a couple of months. Like, it tanked. The show basically died. And at that point, you have to start recognizing that, okay, I have to change and evolve. He posted something on his Patreon page, and you can kind of read the anger and frustration in his voice, and I totally get it. So he has 430,000 subscribers, which is, I mean, that's a lot. Like, the average person should be able to make a living with that amount of subscribers. But what you'll see is a lot of his videos only get 1,000 views in the first few days. A couple thousand views in the first few days. And then every once in a while, 20,000 views in the first 2 days or 3 days. And as a content creator, you kind of have to recognize that. And while his post is very complaining, like, I don't want to do what YouTube wants me to do. I don't want to do what everyone else does. Why can't I do my own thing? And the reason why is because the data speaks for itself. All of what you need to know about what people want to watch, like, it's all there. Like, if you just pay attention. So I've trying to evolve my own show, my own channel, and what I'm trying to accomplish by paying attention to what you, the viewers, watch and do, what you click on. What holds your retention? What makes you watch 3 or 4 of my videos in a row? And stop trying to fight the system. I would love to, review Atari games. I would love to, do 8-minute reviews on some obscure game that's mediocre or bad. But nobody wants to watch those videos. And if nobody wants to watch them, then what's the point of doing it? I know there's the passion and the art and nothing else matters, but that is kind of what matters. I don't sing and make music because nobody would want to watch it. So what's the point? Legacy, it's everything. What do you want to be remembered as? So I honestly think if Mark doesn't kind of change and evolve and stop being angry at YouTube for screwing him and not allowing him to reach those 400,000 people, I think the show is going to die. He'll live on. He's a great artist. He's hilarious. He's totally entertaining. There's a reason why he was so big for so many years.
Doesn't recognize shit.
But at some point, you kind of have to evolve. There's a reason why none of us, few of us, I can't say none, somebody would be like, I do. There's a reason why so few of us watch sitcoms anymore. Like, a show like Seinfeld isn't going to happen anytime soon because we don't watch sitcoms. And if nobody is going to watch them, then what's the point of making it? So I don't know why I brought that up. I read his comment and I kind of took it as a bit whiny, which I thought was very weird. I would never complain or like, I'm given a choice. 3,000 people have decided to hit subscribe, and every month a couple hundred more decide to, and I have this awesome opportunity to get in front of people and talk, and people care what I have to say, and I couldn't imagine complaining about that. Like, I don't get it. So if you've noticed the show change and evolve, that's awesome. Some people think that I haven't changed and evolved and I'm still the same boring dude I was back in 2010, and that's fine too. Don't watch it. Alright, I was going to answer another question, but I'm losing light here. There's a bad storm coming, so let me go ahead and move. The question was, should I buy Vectrex? And the answer is yes. If you ever have the opportunity to buy Vectrex, you should absolutely buy Vectrex. It's sitting right here next to me. It is it is by far the coolest video game system ever. Not the best, like the game library is limited and there's some other issues, but it is the coolest, like without a doubt. That vector screen blew my mind. I saw this at Classic Game Room. I saw this at the Midwest Gaming Classic back in 2011, 2012. I'm sure I did a video about it, and it blew my mind. And when I had the opportunity, local game shop, a couple local game shops, whenever they'll get something really cool, they'll post it on their Facebook, like, hey, look what we got. Like, I saw that picture, and I went straight to the store and bought it. Like, I could not pass it up. That's how awesome it is. There's some really awesome games. The nice thing about the Vectrex is it kind of has a lot of either arcade games or rip-off of arcade games. And there's not that much crap on the system, so it's pretty easy to buy 5 or 6 games and you're set. They're all awesome. Clean Sweep, one of my favorites, Pac-Man Clone, and then Scramble from Konami, which is a really cool early shmup for, that's what it is, and it's awesome, and I love it. We'll dive into that topic again some other time, but yes, the answer is if you ever have the opportunity to buy a Vectrex, you absolutely should. It's awesome. So coming to the end of our show here, we have the cheap game segment. This is the segment of the show where we talk about 2 games I paid less than $5 for. One goes for more than $5 today, and the other one is still less than $5. So if you're getting into gaming or looking for something cheap to buy on a classic system, you don't have to spend more than $5. There's a ton of games out there. So we're going to start with $3.99. This is the Steel Empire on the Sega Genesis. This, I don't know what it goes for anymore. I looked it up, I wrote it on my list, and I've forgotten. I'm going to say around 20 or so. I'm not going to look it up. That's not what the show is about. So, Steel Empire is a side-scrolling shoot-'em up on the Sega Genesis. It was also re-released on the Game Boy Advance. And I want to say it had a modern re-release. These guys that own the IP must still be around because they're still porting it and tweaking it and things like that. But it is a steampunk-themed Genesis shooter. And for one, it's just really awesome to play as a blimp. You can shoot in both directions. The difficulty actually isn't insane. Usually I can sit down and play this and beat the final boss in a single sitting, which for me is pretty not the norm for a shmup. I'm not that great at the genre, but it's just a really awesome game not a lot of people talk about. It seems to be coming up more and more. People really seem to be discovering this game and finding out how great it is. But that is an awesome game, and if you ever have an opportunity to get that, you should definitely check it out. There's a couple levels that really... the Genesis obviously has a color palette issue, and depending on the talent of the developer creating the game, games on the Genesis can look kind of contrasty and not very good. This game, there's a couple levels where just the different pinks and hues that they got out of the Genesis combined with the parallax scrolling, it just looks sensational. It's just a gorgeous game, really cool soundtrack. The steampunk theme is just awesome, and I love the game. The other game, let's see here, I got this for $2.99. I'm so bad at this. This is Sonic 3D Blast. So I got this complete in box. I think there's a manual? No manual. Not complete in box. I got this in a box for $3. I imagine this has got to be 15 years old. The sticker on this doesn't look familiar at all. This is a game that I've played for a really long time. For most of my gaming life, people have hated Sonic 3D Blast with a passion. Now, I've done quite a few videos on Sonic 3D Blast because I like the game, so I like to share that different perspective. And it seems there's a lot of newer gamers and then a lot of old fans that have always liked this and then are now talking about, I do like this. And a lot of new gamers where the simple collecting style gameplay appeals to them. It kind of plays like a an extremely limited Lego game in a way, where you need to defeat enemies, collect things, which unlocks the next area, and you continue on your way. I'm not sure if you guys can hear that, but it's getting loud. So Sonic 3D Blast is still a $5 game loose on the Sega Genesis. If it's something that you haven't played before, and you don't, and you kind of dig those like relaxed, laid-back games, this is kind of great. The isometric levels actually play really good, and it does feel like you are moving Sonic around in like a 3D-ish level. Obviously it's isometric, so there isn't all that same freedom, but everything pretty much works. Something I always forget in this game is that one of the power-ups actually gives Sonic, I hope this is true, I've never tried it because I always forget it. Someone always leaves a comment saying if you get the yellow power-up, which is the shield of course, but it also gives you the homing attack. And they say that this is the first appearance of a homing attack in a Sonic game. I always forget to try it just because it's a 2D Sonic game, so my first, inkling isn't, hey, let me double press A and see what happens. Like when you play Sonic Adventure, you just instinctively know, this is what I gotta do. So I'll have to do some research on that, plug it in and turn it on and see if that's what it does. But anyway, the music in this game is absolutely phenomenal. 2 of the songs in this game were then remixed by the composer and used in Sonic Adventure. Like, that's how awesome the compositions in this game are. I like this game all the way up until the final boss, which I think is really cheap and doesn't work well with the isometric gameplay. But if you haven't played Sonic 3D Blast and you are looking for something that's a little more casual, check it out. Fantastic. So that is going to do it for today's episode. If you're watching this show, it's so weird doing this on a Tuesday because I'm a creature of like habit and routine, and when my routine gets I'm a creature of habit, and when my routine gets disrupted, I don't always deal the best with it. So like right now, it feels really weird to be doing getting 8 hours of work and then sitting in front of the computer and putting this all together and doing it feels really strange. So I feel like I'm trying to rush through the show because I have other Tuesday things to do, which is usually getting tomorrow's video all ready and set to go, putting the finishing touches on the draft, making sure I've got all the footage I need. So it feels really weird. So I don't know. We're gonna do it for the rest of the summer. It'll become routine. The show will go a little smoother, but I hope you enjoyed it, guys. If you're watching this on YouTube and want to have this like a normal MP3 or RSS feed, the link is in the description below. If you are listening to this and want to see me, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ImplantGames. And until next time, guys, have a great week. Hello and welcome to episode 86 of the ImplantGames podcast. I'm your host Chris Genthy and I have a great show lined up for you today. So let's go ahead and get started with the news. So the first big piece of retro news this week is the company Collector Vision buys the name Acclaim and Exidy. So Collector Vision, of course, is the company that was going to have a launch game for the failed Coleco Chameleon. They do homebrews, like physical homebrew releases for things like the Super Nintendo. I've never played or bought any of their games before. They have a Wii U indie title coming out in the fall, which I might check out. But as a whole, not something I'm experienced with. And then, of course, one of the folks that is part of Collector Vision is John Lester, aka Gamester81. So I thought it was really strange that they bought the old name Acclaim. Exidy's not very interesting to me. I've never heard of this company before. From what I gather, they made arcade games in the 70s and 80s and then folded before the 90s rolled around. Now Acclaim, of course, is a company we've all heard of. They started making games they developed and mostly published, but they also had in-house development teams. They bought a lot of companies throughout the 90s. Like Iguana, who did the NBA Jam ports and things like that. But Acclaim, died in 2004. So they lasted from 1987 to 2004, and then died. Now, with Collector Vision buying these two names, they are only buying the names. So any of the games and the IP, the intellectual property, they are not going to own. So like for myself, one of my favorite Acclaim games is the Revolt game on the Dreamcast. Some other company owns that right, that owns the intellectual property to Revolt so they can continue that series going. So I found it really, well, one, it's weird that anyone would want to buy the name Acclaim because it's not like near the end. They were very well known for quality, and then, yeah, I mean, really, it was just, they didn't make a lot of quality releases. A lot of their games were shovelware, were licensed games, and they didn't have a reputation for having great games. And when I think like a classic NES game, I think of something like Capcom or Konami or Sunsoft. I don't think Acclaim. Granted, they did publish some great NES games. I just took a look at Tiger Heli, for example, a Tau-plane vertical shmup for the NES, which I'm rather fond of. But again, it's not an Acclaim game, and buying the name Acclaim doesn't get you access to that name Tiger Heli. Now for me, this is mostly a non-story, just because I don't really care. When companies buy names and try to use them and things like that, like everybody knows it's not the real Acclaim or the old Acclaim, the classic Acclaim. Just like when you buy a game today that says Atari, you know this isn't the same company, from the 70s. You know it's just a name slapped on a case, and Hasbro or Time Warner or whoever owns Infogrames, whoever owns the Atari name today, they're just using that to try and sell a couple extra games. I don't think it works. I've never looked at a game on the shelf and thought, oh, Atari, I think I'll buy this. Like, it's just not real. So that's kind of where the story ended for me. And then a buddy of mine, I've mentioned him on the show before, youtube.com/PocketMigo, I believe. Kind of brought up that it kind of bothered him, which I always find amusing, just because it's somebody who looks at things different than me, and I appreciate that perspective. And one of the comments that he made was buying, another company's name is kind of like riding on the coattails of somebody else's work, which is exactly like what people, whoever owns Atari today, is doing. They're riding on the coattails of, all that awesomeness that was in the late 70s and the early 80s, and, how America, was a huge name in video games. Now it's, Nintendo, Sony, and then Microsoft. It's mostly a Japanese, Eastern type of business. But at that time, Atari was everything. Atari was king. And you're kind of buying, you're buying that legacy. I kind of think it's neat that what I like is there's still a value on that work that somebody did. So all of those people that worked, making the Atari name great, or all the people that worked making the Acclaim name, whatever it was, still holds value, and somebody can still buy that value that those folks created. So I'm like pretty much anything, I'm pretty indifferent, but I thought I would share that other perspective because it kind of made me think a little bit. Should somebody, when you buy a name like Acclaim, are you riding on someone else's coattails, or are you purchasing the value that somebody else created? Is that okay, or should you worry about it? I'm not sure. If I was a small company like Collector Vision now, I don't know how much it would cost or how much it did cost to buy Acclaim. I would imagine tens of thousands of dollars, and it seems like that money could be better spent elsewhere. I don't see how you get a return on that investment. Like, if you buy the name Acclaim, how are you going to make that money back? Because somebody like me who's very nostalgic for old games isn't going to, this says Acclaim on it, I'm going to buy it. There's no return on buying it. So for me, it's just like a strange business decision, but I'm not a business owner, so maybe there is some merit to it, I'm not sure. The next awesome piece of news, and I pray that this is real, the company Retro USB announces the Nintendo AVS. This has been way off my radar, but checking out the Retro USB Facebook page, this has been going on since the beginning of the year. Now, Retro USB makes, I guess they've designed and produce, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. They don't obviously make it. It's made in China. They make USB adapters so you can use a second
I'd say that's a pretty good score, at least second place.
plug it into this USB adapter, plug it into your computer.
Oh man, this is a long video.
With a real controller. Stuff like that I really dig. I think it's cool. So that's what this company does. I believe they made a
Okay, see you later.
Game Boy type player for the NES. I think it was more proof of concept.